such a fundamental aspect of being a best version of yourself is understanding the things that truly trigger you.
Meet Buntu Majaja, the CEO of SA Innovation Summit. From humble beginnings to becoming a driving force for innovation in South Africa, Buntu shares his inspiring journey in this podcast episode.
My determination is to master my mind, to master my body. This is a lifelong goal for all of us. Look at something that you are beating yourself up with, because we're always beating ourselves up with something.
What's something that you had to recently forgive yourself for? Buntu,
Naison.
what was it like growing up in the Majaja household?
Matriarchal. I'd probably say humble. And community-based, in the sense of the African adage, a child is raised by a village, takes a village to raise a child. We all grew up with our aunts, uncles, calling them all moms and dads. And I'll then say, for me, there's three of us at home that I grew up with, middle of three children. At some point, that was in the villages of Eastern Cape, but at some point my mother decided to move us into different towns, or her job rather actually moved us into different towns across Eastern Cape. So up until East London, Tata, Butterworth, Gua, all sorts of places. About every 2 years we were moving, and eventually ended up in Pretoria, where we've settled, and she did that, raised these three children by herself, and put them all through school. And often, from my perspective, prioritized these three children in a way that independence was encouraged. In some ways, excellence was encouraged, but in some ways, pressure was also there. But in some ways, also not available. Like, she's not around, so busy. One last thing I'd love to note is my grandfather was a teacher, and he was a teacher because he and his brothers moved to Northwest during the early 1900s, mining boom. People were migrating, right? Migrant workers. His mother got sick. He was sent back to Eastern Cape, and he was the only one who decided going back. And then his mother passed away, and he decided to stay, and was tasked to start a school. And he then met his wife, my mother's mother, and they both taught in that school. And so education was number one priority in the Majaja household. That's continued to be the case 2 generations later, I believe.
If I was a fly on the wall in that Eastern Cape household, what would I have heard? What were you told that essentially shaped the way you view the world?
I remember my grandmother waking up, before dawn, No one should be asleep. The sun shouldn't wake up before you. Is what she used to say. By the time the sun wakes up, your day is, and you haven't woken up, your day is finished. There are cows to send out to the field. There is milk to be milked. There is fire to be started. There's water to be collected. And if all of those things only happen when the sun comes out, it's too late. And yeah, that lady was incredible. And also, we'd gather around the fireplace at night. We'd all be eating from the same bowl as the children. And if there was any problems, you guys sort it out. You guys are together. Anything here is all of yours. This is nothing that's for this person or that person. There's nothing, no one gets more than the other. It's all of yours. Everyone's equal. You guys sort it out. You guys are together. And I think care, maybe something else that comes to mind. I just remember how everywhere you went, you'd feel safe. You would feel, as a kid, I think now I was really as a kid at that time, whether you're running outside, you felt the neighbors, they knew you, they'd greet, they care for you. If they saw something was wrong, they'd be able to help you. If you're running outside without shoes on or not dressed properly, even if your mother's not there, there will be a mother who will be checking on you at night, making sure that the children do still have space to be children, or not during the day. I mean, space to be children. You go out and you play, taken care of, but also at night, we'd all be sitting out in one room. I move the couches aside, set up a bed, 6 of us sleeping in there, and people coming in to check in and out, what the kids are fine and so on. But also, I guess, a strong sense of tradition. I don't know, it's valued in the sense that ceremonies like when a child is born, slaughtering a goat for them, and that being a tribute to ancestors, and certain parts of the goat are then used to clothe the child, used to put under the bed, and everyone would gather around that. Everyone would chip in to make that ceremony happen. When my older cousins went to initiation, rite of passage, everybody would come in from the village, or everyone would come in from different towns, and it would be celebrated, and they would all put money together. And there was 3 of them, and they all did it together. Again, the sort of communal kind of thing. They grew up together. They're all brothers, even though they have different mothers and fathers. And they going through this rite of passage together. I remember that as well. And
what cultural background?
This is in the Eastern Cape. This is in the valleys of Eastern Cape. So it's Xhosa.
Okay.
It was the mother tongue spoken during those ceremonies. But in general, I think many of these things, of course, are shared across different Nguni and broader Bantu speaking people. But my experience was, is Xhosa traditions. And so you get involved. You speak to the ancestors. You get involved with taking care of the livestock, and the animals, and selecting the right one as a tribute to ancestors. And you go through these stages of being responsible on participating in that ceremony, in terms of the graduation is the person who actually slits the throat of the goat, in a sense. So that means that you know how to, you know how to, I don't want to say mercifully, but I'll use the word right for a lack of a better word. You know how to take life in a right way, as part of the process and the experience, this cultural experience of, this is life going back. Life came from the ground and it's going back to the ground, and and that connecting into ancestors. It's not a killing for the sake of killing, sort of slaughter for the sake of slaughter, only, and on the sake of their food only, but it's an entire experience, and the way you do it is also almost painless, almost instant for the for the goat or the sheep or the cow, etc.
Quick one. Over the past year, we've been sharing stories of impactful individuals across the continent, and this channel has been growing thanks to each and every one of you tuning in every week to watch these videos. But we have noticed that more than 70% of you who watch this content are not subscribed. So please hit that subscribe button, and I promise to bring you the stories of more impactful individuals across this continent. And is this very much still part of your, day-to-day, the rituals, the cultures? And I guess the follow-up question to that would be, whenever I've seen you online or in person, you have a very specific sense of fashion, be it your hat or what you're wearing. Could you maybe just walk us through that?
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. The recognition on a, I guess, a certain look that I enjoy. I think from a day-to-day, it's very difficult to slaughter a goat in the suburbs of Sandton.
I can imagine.
But in a day-to-day basis. But I mean, every time that we do have an, for example, at my wedding, we 5 years ago, it was imperative that there was 2 sheep, and there was and even my partner's family participated in that, even though they completely different culture, and they from Japan. It was the first time in South Africa.
Interesting.
And it's part of the tradition to for both the groom and the bride's side to participate, and there was a tribute of that, and so it is made a point as part of any big moment, and I think on a day-to-day basis, it's mostly happening in my heart and mind, through my mindfulness practices, etc. And maybe those mindful practices are also where a sense of a decision, maybe, of like fashion, or how you show up, how you dress, of course affects is a presentation to the world, or but I think in many ways it's also an expression, or for me, I think it's a form of it's a form of art. Which is an expression, which is really a conversation of for yourself in terms of an identity. How do I feel? How do I look to me? How do I imagine me? And how can I manifest that in reality? And I think that's, as you asked this, I really think this is such a fundamental aspect of being a best version of yourself, is understanding the things that truly trigger you as an individual and who you are, and in some ways drive you, in some ways wake you up, in some ways give you energy, fill your energy up. And in understanding those things, how do you make those things come into life? How do you express them? How do you have a behavior and action around them? And that is a process of self-awareness coupled up with a process of expression and manifesting or living, living your self-awareness out into the world. And of course, we're all doing this, sometimes consciously and subconsciously we do these things. But I think the more that we can do them with intention, the closer we get to our living out our potential.
You also spoke about this idea of, I think the way you put it is having your practice. For better word, I'm going to use a sacred practice, right? Of perhaps what grounds you and keeps you in place so that you can go out into the world and, become your best self. What does that practice look like for you?
Yeah, thanks so much. I do believe that the brain is a tool. It isn't who we are, but we experience life through the brain and our mind. We're also and that's deep, and it's part of our body. And they interact and they affect each other. And of course, your mind is also where your emotions come from. It's where your cognitive abilities come from in terms of calculating things, making decisions. And I believe that and my goal, my determination is to master my mind, to master my body. And this is a lifelong goal for all of us, because in many ways we fall into similar categories, and there's science that backs how the chemistry in our body works, etc. But we are also very unique in how these things are combined. Like when throughout the day you're most alert, what kinds of food affect your gut biome in a way that will affect your emotions and so on. And so for me, so far what I've found is that taking time to prime yourself in the morning and to set your body in the best way of, for me, being productive, being able to work on the things that I give my life to, my job, my family, etc. In order to be there as fully as I can, my body needs to be in tip-top productivity. I need to have top-line energy. I need to be able to sustain high levels of alertness throughout the day, and also I need to, especially at this point in terms of my role at the Innovation Summit as CEO, is making good decisions and being able to be alert and available for a whole variable of situations, from a focused moment to an emergency that pops up, to a personal matter for a team member, and then to an influential point, maybe with a client. How to and all these things all happening in a day. And I think the mind really just being open to this is key. So exercise first thing in the morning, to build a cardiovascular system and a body and that's what happens with the body, right? When you repeat certain things, it then starts operating like that. So waking up at 5 a.m., for example, in the morning, try to be whatever time it is, doesn't have to be 5 a.m. But for me, I think consistency is key. Then your body wakes up at that time automatically. For me, in the morning, exercise is key. That raises my blood rate, my heart rate or blood pressure, whatever the case is, but it brings me alert, makes me more alert, and I want my body, when it's in the morning, to be alert, to be awake, and to be ready to go, and and then setting an intention for the day, particularly trying to imagine. I don't do this every time, it's very difficult to do it every time, but but I think it's most important. These things become most important when it's most difficult to do, when you need them the most. It's not actually for the times when it's easy. And that's when you really tap into them and you see, okay, all of that, the good practices that you had are actually riding you through these tough times. So, setting an intention and imagining what would be a good day, from having thought about the day before, what are the things that I want to achieve, and then throughout the day, setting up my day in a way that there's space for deep work, space for collaborative work, set those times apart. Because I think there was this podcast I was watching. I think it's in, who was it? I think it was Joe Rogan and Elon, maybe, or Lex. But he was talking about like the marginal cost of time, and how an hour, for someone like Elon, can make $1 billion difference at the end of the year, or billions of dollars difference at the end of the year in the top line of Tesla. But it's difficult to measure it, because you can't really say, you can't really just take out the total amount and divide it by the number of hours in a year, because sometimes that decision that you made at a certain point has a ripple effect, that if you had used that hour in a different way, could have affected a tens of billions difference. But the same thing can happen in 2 days, or decisions over 2 days. But yeah, it's very difficult to like measure the value of the hours. But what I'm really trying to say is, throughout the day, when I'm cycling between deep and collaborative work, sometimes I have points of mindfulness and meditation, where I try to zone out, touch, or pull myself to myself, and get the monkey brain, in a sense, to just slow down and find clarity, in terms of what's the most important thing to do right now. What's the most important thing for today? What's the most, and why am I doing this? Why can I do this? Will I do this? And just really reiterate these things, and the intention, because sometimes when you show up in a certain room with a certain intention, I believe the outcomes become different, and the decisions made in that room, in that hour, can be decisions that push you forward 6 months, or they could push you back, your goal back by 6 months, how close you are from your goal.
Of course. I think also what I'm understanding and hearing from this is ensuring that, of course, that first foundation is taken care of from a health perspective, but just also centering yourself, and you call it priming, which I love that word. You priming yourself so that whatever happens in your day, you are able to react in a way that is productive and that hopefully moves you forward. That practice that you spoke about, when essentially you are reflecting quite often throughout your day, what does that reflective practice look like? Is it just breathing, closing your eyes and breathing deeply? What is it, so that we can actually, recenter and continue? Because of course, at times it feels like, for me specifically, like running a business, like you have tens, hundreds of things to do,
tabs opened up in your mind.
Correct. And it can be very distracting. And of course, you see an email, but you know that, hey, like, this is my deep work, I'm supposed to be doing this, but I know I've seen it now, and everything in me just wants to, how do you keep yourself focused and centered so that you can produce that high quality?
And of course, it's a difficult balance in terms of optimizing urgency and importance of things.
Correct.
But I believe that, for me, the best place to find that balance and that optimization is in taking just 5-10 minutes to do this exact practice. And that, there's very few things that would be 10 minutes urgent that I need to get to. And after that, I'll also realize actually it may be a day or two urgent compared to other things. But for me, what I've found is sitting down. It's best on the floor for me, but even on a chair, crossing parts of my limbs. There's studies that show that the right side of our body is engaged or controlled by the left side of the brain, and the left side of the body is controlled and engaged by the right side of the brain. And so crossing them creates some sort of dynamic of increased connectedness or whatever. There's
Interesting.
And just more engagement between the two halves of the brain. And so I and also looking at, I used to be a yoga instructor at some point. And I
Can't picture
did,
that.
yeah. Right, completely wild in my those colored t-shirts and yoga pants, etc. Meditating, but I really I think I really just value mindfulness and etc. And I found yoga was a great space for not only physical vitality but also mental vitality. And but even in that practice of the yogis, the ancient knowledge talks about this, this crossing of limbs and sometimes of fingers. I'm seated, I'm crossed my limbs, I close my eyes, and I think the whole point is to switch off for me. So good ways of doing that is finding is your breath. Your breath is one of the most easiest things to sort of control, but also to follow. Tony Robbins says it's like a kite, that when you breathe, on how you're breathing in, like how if you breathe in fast, your heart rate is going to go up. If you breathe slowly and you hold, your heart rate will go down. And it's like the wind, the kite, and it becomes like you as a kite, but your breath is like the wind blowing that. So for me, it's really then about following my breath. Breathe in, breathe out, and try to find presence of now. Like I'm here, I'm now. I feel I'm on the floor. I feel I'm in Tuesday, for example. It's 10 a.m. or it's 4 p.m. My body's positioned in this way, and really that starts for me to slow down. The mind, the thinking slows down my heart, brings presence, and then and I think it's very difficult, but for me, initially it would usually be difficult to just focus on your breath and have no thoughts. The thoughts will come to you, and you start to looking at them from outside, like, hey, this is a thought that came, and you don't want to say, no, I don't want to think, but you sort of allow it to land, you observe it, and then if you go back to the breath, feeling I'm breathing in and then breathing out again, that thought begins to disappear. And over time, I've found, over the years of doing this, is it then becomes so much. You move into this zone of complete presence, of complete mindfulness, and almost looking outside of yourself. And when you're there, there's so much clarity that comes for me, and then the thoughts that are coming aren't distracting thoughts, but it's almost like this surfacing of what are the most important things for me right now, and then sometimes I write it out. That thought, it's probably something I need to do. What can I do about this? Then I'll go back and repeat, and if I want to set an intention, I would then go through, there's I think his name is Vishani Lakiani. He wrote this book. I forget the name of the book, but if he runs
Mind Valley.
Mind Valley, yes. So in his book, he's got like this meditation practice where he goes through 5 different cycles or intentions that you set in this meditation practice. And I found that works very well for priming me in a way that's highly aligned to my purpose, of what I believe I'm here to do. But particularly what moves me is fighting against inequality, fighting against injustice, etc. And probably based on that upbringing of community and humanity and valuing humanity. So he starts off by saying, you love yourself.
Yeah.
Think about love to yourself. 2, you think about humanity, love to humanity. 3, you think of someone that you have you feel like you have wronged, or you feel like you're not on good terms with, or you feel like you want to improve that relationship, and send to them the intention of more connectedness, of positivity, of love in a way. Imagine that person, or that relationship, or that group of people, and then you also look at something that you are beating yourself up with, because we're always beating up ourselves up with something, and we say, this is probably our first shot at this thing of life. Give yourself some grace and just say, I forgive you. I forgive you. Forgive yourself. And then lastly is for me, it's really about setting I'm imagining something that is precious to you in life, in this world, and you imagine that growing, vision that growing, whatever it is that's precious to you. See that and envision that growing, and going through those 5 cycles. And for me, really, I feel sets me in an intention to take on any challenge that comes my way.
What's something that you had to recently forgive yourself for?
It's been a while, but I know long ago, I had when I spoke about earlier about how you had a partnership with your co-founder, I had a partnership as well with my co-founder, where we went 3 years, 2.5 years or so into this business, and at the end of the day, we saw different eyes. We didn't see the same vision anymore, and we ended up, and we were very close, of course, but we ended up going our separate ways on the business. There was a heated protracted dispute, a heated protracted dispute on how the company is going to be torn apart in a way, and I felt wronged, he felt wronged. But over time, I also recognized what were the things that I needed to learn that caused that. And I beat myself up over those things. Like, okay, why, these are things that I did that messed up the company. Okay, what he said about me, I wasn't actually listening to later, but when I was reflecting on it, I wasn't listening to it at the time, but when I was reflecting on it later, okay, that's probably true. And so, this, in a sense, okay, that was kind of my fault, and part of this was my fault, and I used to beat myself about that.
What was the biggest lesson that you learned from that experience?
The biggest lesson was, resilience, I think is a big one. When we were going through this process, when we started the business, and it was a business that was that was an online startup between investors in East Asia and startups in Africa, and it took a lot of investment personally from our own capital, where at some point was in decent debt, and I was like I was not making my rent. I was counting, my meals per day. And same to an extent until we raised funding, and I think just in that process, I realized that the turning point is always at the 11th hour, and that without resilience, you just never know if tomorrow is going to be the day that everything turns apart. Because when we got to that point of where, and we never asked, whether we should stop at any point now. It was always, could just be next week. That conversation we just had yesterday could be the one, that will get us through. And the day that we did confirm the deal with our investors, it was really at the last minute possible for the business, before we would just not be able to continue anymore. So I think resilience, in some ways, was a key one for me as to how far actually am I willing to do this, because it's also like a reinforcement to myself, of how much am I believing in this, in terms of how far am I willing to take it, how much am I willing to sacrifice. And I think sacrifices is just as an important factor for you believing in your dream, and it's like it's almost like a what you buy your dreams with, in a sense. It's like, how much sacrifice do I believe in that, and that comes from a sort of session of aspect of resilience. And the other thing that I probably deeply pulled out from that is, in a dynamic of partnership, you aren't in control. Trust the dynamic, like trust the others, and trust how you guys have been put together.
Interesting. I like that. So you have this goal, this grand vision in mind, which essentially you would term the destination. For example, let's say it's a business, it's a deal, or it's a place where you want to be in your business and in your life, but you essentially release this control of how you get there, and you trust yourself and the people around you to find the best way to get there. I think what I struggle with is that very resilient, but I don't know when to stop. I don't know, if you say no to me, I'm going to find a way to get that yes. And sometimes, of course, it's to my detriment, because perhaps it's the wrong thing to focus on, or it's not listening to that no, and I'm hearing not yet. So how do you find that line between being resilient and going, and you have that destination in mind, while still understanding that this may not be for you right now?
Yeah, it's I battle with that. Like, what does it mean to give up? That's another way I'd frame that question. Like, what is it to give up? Because I see the opposite of resilience as giving up. And my promise to myself is I will never give up.
and also maybe possibly another thing that I learned was applying a framework around that, around how you make decisions, around how long do you pursue until you're like, I need to turn left or right. So,
Put a timeline, you put
Correct.
conditions to it,
Correct.
that matter for you, and try to make those concrete. Yeah.
I just speak about purpose earlier, and your purpose in this lifetime. Do you feel that through the medium of SICE, you are in some shape or way or form achieving that and living that?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't imagine doing anything else. When I was at University of Pretoria, doing engineering, studying my chemical engineering degree, coming from the background that I come from, the valleys of Eastern Cape and other small towns, etc. I found injustice in the city. Not in the city of Pretoria itself, but just walking down the road and seeing a brother or a sister whom I believed, and I still do, that could one or two things have been different in my life, that could have been me. And I had to reconcile as to why it's not me. And that was a sort of a spark for me as to what should I be doing? Why am I doing this degree? What should I be doing with my life? And I believe that's one of the most important questions any human being can ask themselves, is why am I here? And for me, the first answer was, I don't know, and there isn't an answer, but I have to decide the answer. And then the process of deciding the answer becomes your journey, because that decision is an ever-moving thing. And at that point for me, it was being an engineer, having an engineering job is not going to help me resolve this inequality. How can I contribute to resolving this inequality? Being an engineer is not it. Probably being an entrepreneur is it. And the course of my life from there was an entrepreneurship journey, from going from engineering into management consulting, business school, doing various startups, failure after failure, some being mediocrely ongoing and earning income, but really building an entrepreneurial experience, mindset, and skills, just valuable skills in the market. And so what I've now come to decide on is that contributing to that inequality is two things. It's entrepreneurship. We need more people building businesses and expressing themselves through businesses in Africa. We also, in the second part of it, is education. Education in a broad sense, from something that's certified to something where you're applying yourself in a certain field, you're applying yourself on work, and you're building experience, you're building capabilities that are valuable in the marketplace.
The SICE 3-day summit was just completed. What is your intention for this previous summit?
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. It's, I think we wanted to double down on deal making. Over the last 7 years, pre-COVID, the activity of the startup activity can be inferred by the investment curve, the investment activity, the VC activity going into Africa, which was on a 70% year-on-year growth up until COVID. Even in COVID, it continued to hit a record-breaking level. I think something close to $3.4 billion in 2020, but it's then plateaued. $3.4 billion, though, remains a very small percentage of the global investment space, less than 2%. However, the growth potential in Africa is the best in the world in this space, in terms of coming from a low base, 70% year on year at that time. And we then saw all over the world, though, the capital going into private equity, into VC, etc., has dropped. If you look at reports by Partech and Savca, etc., South African Venture Capital Association, or the African Venture Capital Association, AVCA, and it plateaued in the last 2 to 3 years, even globally, although South Africa is relatively resilient. And we then set the intention of how do we unleash more capital, because we don't believe that the same economics that are happening globally should be applying, in the same context here in Africa. There is still so much more opportunity. And in fact, these sort of global economics are financial games in a sense, but the true economics of value that's happening on the ground has not really changed much. So the opportunity remains. Therefore, we said, how do we double down on deal making? And we believe that in order to have meaningful connections that result in deals, you need a recipe of inspiring or inspiring insight, well curated networks that make sense for each other, as well as an environment that is relaxed, that is open, that is creative. And through this, the setup and the user journey and the user experience of the S Innovation Summit was trying to achieve these things. We hope that we have put together these recipes in such a way, to the best that we can, that will result in this hypothesis of more meaningful deals. And we will see by this time next year whether, as we follow up with the 500 plus meetings that happened, but also those that are happening now, what kind of deals and opportunities came up from that, and how much. And our bold target that we've set as a community is, which I, as I mentioned in my thank you address to all of the delegates, and really just saying thank you for everyone for making this happen, is $20 million. We want to announce that and celebrate that as a bold target of what's been raised and catalyzed through the activity in SACE 2025. And so we will know then, right, how this recipe has been mixed. But as I was walking out, I bumped into a startup who's running a clean tech business, and says that just that day he has a almost confirmed contract of 3 million rand. And so it's a small start to a bold goal, but an encouraging step, just a day after.
Wow,
at least
so
from a
he got the check at the, that person got the check at the event.
He's basically, he says he's basically discussed the terms of the contract, and now they just need to do the administration of putting together the contract.
Wow.
And what they will be working on.
And, attending SAIS, there's many moving parts to host an event like that, specifically over multiple days. How do you ensure that it's still, smooth sailing across all those days, and ensure that all the pieces of the puzzle come together?
Well, the first thing is to accept that we can't do it and say that we won't be able to ensure across all of those things. I think that frees us up to identify what are the most important things, what are the key levers that we can pull, and what are the leverages that we can press on that will give us 80% of the output with 20% of the input, right? Or effort, because it is it is a monstrosity of an exercise to put together into 2 to 3 days, right? And so that's the first part. It frees us up to be able to identify those things, and I think that helps us, therefore, to streamline. I think the other thing is a great team. Really, it's the team, and the people that care about this, people that are committed, and people that are absolutely determined to be excellent at what they do, to be the best versions of themselves through this activity, and they're the ones that make it happen. And it's just in those hours, in those days, during, when this thing is happening, that how the team comes together, how the people show up and navigate that space, that magic happens. And then, of course, preparation, building as much, in a way, simulation, going through the event again and again, the different parts, down to as much detail as possible beforehand. That helps you to really think through every moving piece as far as feasibly possible. And if you're able to put those things together, at least from my purview right now, I think that you'll always be moving the benchmark higher and higher.
And of course, SARS has your flagship event annually, but throughout the year, what other things do you enable the ecosystem in terms of programs, in terms of events? What else are you guys doing?
Yeah. Thanks for that. I think so. We have the conference as our flagship annual event, as you rightfully mentioned, and that's part of 3 pillars of the activities that we do, which is the eventing, and there we also host smaller events online or in collaboration with partners offline. We hosted, for example, a series of corporate venture capital events preceding the summit this year, which was about how do we catalyze this balance sheet of close to $2 billion in the JSE, that is unspent money that can be catalyzed into the ecosystem, or into this asset class, for example. So we also held a digital tech event in Joburg in partnership with ecosystem conveners, different ecosystem conveners, and then we also hosted in the last 2 years a Future of Work conference and dialogue in partnership with TUT. And so that will be on the eventing side. But the other 2 pillars is acceleration programming, which includes investment readiness programs, includes commercialization programs, and then the 3rd pillar is community, where there's a community of mentors, there's a community of founders that connect to each other, that are running through these programs. And so those will every year sort of have a journey into the annual summit.
Buntu, amazing. The last part of our podcast is called the Fast Fire. So I'm going to ask you these set of questions, and if you could answer in maybe a short sentence or word, that would be perfect.
Cool.
What's one thing that you would change or improve about South Africa?
South Africa? Education.
Short and sweet. Which level?
ECD. If I had to choose a level.
Yeah.
But all across.
Okay. Yeah, we could talk about that.
Yeah.
I think just on this point, what's your take on the traditional certification of education as opposed to short courses and skill development?
I think that there are generally 2 outcomes of education. One is knowledge generation, and the other one is productivity. They both are connected and work hand in hand. But I don't think that you have education without both of them.
Oh.
Higher productivity to increase, so a level of productivity, to be productive are certain skills. You need certain skills that are valuable in the marketplace, and you apply them, and there's a trade and there's an economic activity. To increase the quality of those skills, you need knowledge generation, research, people asking, is this the best way to do it? And I believe that the traditional route of education, certification, and a foundational education that sets you up to go and do academic education and be certified, is largely a system built to accommodate as far as possible these two things. But once it starts going into tertiary education, I believe it starts really looking at knowledge generation. And then there are other tertiary education opportunities or steps where you do short courses, you learn specific skills that are targeted at certain outcomes, certain roles, etc., of economic activities. And that won't be a degree, for example, won't be a master's, but it is shorter, etc. And I think the shorter it is, the less complex it is, and i.e. the more specific it is, the more it leans more towards just productivity in the sense of applying it, right? And then the longer it is and the more complex it is, the more it's leaning towards knowledge generation. Now that's at a systemic level, but I think you always want to ask yourself, how does this apply to me? What does it mean for me? And it will probably go down to your why, as to what is it that I'm trying to achieve, where am I right now, and therefore what do I optimize more for between participating in knowledge generation as opposed to participating in certain skills. If you want to be an economic animal in a sense, a capitalistic animal, your best route is probably if you want to be an economic animal quickly, I think your best route is probably to identify a high income skill that you can learn quickly, plug into the marketplace, and then build scale around that. But if you have another purpose that is to figure out how to get more children past the age of 5 in Tanzania, for example, then that's a bit of a more protracted and a complex conversation. You probably need at least, if you want to do that through the public health system, you need a master's in public health for that. Or if you want to be specifically helping to do that in your village, then you're going to need to be a doctor to do that. It's even as an entrepreneur, I think to understand, usually some entrepreneurs are solving those kinds of issues. Sure, some of them, but I think very rarely don't have that inside industry experience and just have the skills. But I think most of the time, even as an entrepreneur, you would then you'd probably a doctor turned entrepreneur that builds a platform to help thousands of doctors do this, to solve this specific problem. So I think that's how I view it. Yeah, that's how I view it at a systemic level, but I'll always ask yourself, how does it apply to me? And then you'll decide, where really do I want to go?
I like that, actually bringing it to you as an individual. What's a contrarian truth that you believe to be true that not many agree with you on?
Contrarian truth? I guess the first thing that comes to mind is just controversy is the truth. That's what I believe. When it is difficult to come to an agreement where both sides are not necessarily wrong, but they're not completely right. That's the truth. Both of them are the truth.
What's one thing you would say to younger Ubuntu right now?
Keep going.
I like it. Fast forward, looking back, what's one thing you would say to the Ubuntu that's sitting right in front of me?
It's so exciting.
Just that. It's so exciting. Brace yourself. Next steps, what's in the pipeline, personally, professionally? What can you share with us?
In the next year, we want to be the go-to platform for catalyzing deal making. So $20 million this time next year. Startups are growing, the ecosystem is vibrant, and we're working with some of the best partners in the country and globally that care about that in Africa.
Amazing. Buntu, thank you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us and all these insights, but also the impact that you're making with size and as a human, just being able to essentially live your purpose and live this intentional life. And what I got most from this is living a life with intention, and that then would translate into living your purpose, which then would mean that you're living to your full potential. So thank you for sharing that with us today.
Thank you, Naison, for the opportunity to be heard, and thank you for connecting voices to those that need it and want it and are looking for it. Great work to do.
Perfect. Thank you.